Okay, well, this is the voluntary Zoom for 9/12, day after 9/11. And I just want to go through a couple of things relatively quickly. So the first share screen that I'll be using is this one here. And basically, I take the position, and it's not literally true perhaps, but everything I know about leadership I learned from the movies. Now, there's an awful lot that we can learn from the movies, and there's an awful lot that we do learn from the movies. So I use movies oftentimes as case studies. So basically, the goals and objectives that I'd like to pursue over this first period or so, and what you're tasked from the syllabus to do is do a little bit of study into the leader-follower relationship, which was really on the syllabus from September 6th, but the identification and understanding of trait theory, theory XY, which was McGregor. And then we're still working with the notion of management versus leadership, and we'll be putting some more meat on the bones there. Last week, we were tasked to watch 12 O'Clock High. If you haven't gotten to it, I hope you'll find the movie and watch it. And at some point soon, although I, list a due date of September 13th, at some point soon, I'd like to have us take a look at that 12 O'Clock High and do some kind of a review or analysis on it. So, in terms of goals and objectives, again, our own definition of leadership, and we will develop that through the discussion board and other methods. We want to look heavily at the idea of what we find in the movies in terms of leadership, leadership theories, and so forth. And, again, by taking as much of the stress as I think I can out of this, we hopefully are creating a very low risk and safe and stable environment. Hopefully, nobody feels overly pressured. So, in terms of the group discussion, and this is reflected in the discussion board, we're starting to get towards the idea of what we think leadership is. And beyond just our own personal opinions, because again, personal opinions don't get us very far. What we want to be able to identify, and these are two somewhat diametrically opposed leaders, the relationship between 12 O'Clock High and the central figure or figures there, which you will be able to identify once you watch the movie. And then further into the semester, we'll be working with James Stockdale, who had been, until his death, a pretty contemporary philosopher, certainly a leadership perspective philosopher, and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the leadership styles that we get from these two major players, some of it from the videos and then other. So we look, for example, at 12 O'Clock High, and this is just giving you a bit of an overview. But you've got this, what has been referred to as hard as nails general, who takes over a bomber pilot unit during World War II, suffering from arguably low morale, and he whips them into fighting shape. Now, there's a bit of abstraction there, but I think we start to get the idea. Now, again, everything I know about leadership I learned from the movies. A look at 10 films, and a lot of these are seminal films with seminal arguments in leadership, but a look at 10 films that can help you basically to inspire your organization if you're so inclined, certainly earn loyalty and respect from your employees, and turn crises into triumph and so forth, but ultimately become a successful leader. And this was an argument put forth by Mike Hoffman, as indicated there. In these 10 movies, include, if you remember or you're familiar with these, Apollo 13, The Bridge on the River Kwai, Dead Poets Society, Elizabeth, Glengarry Glen Ross, It's a Wonderful Life, Norma Ray, Jack Nicholson's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 12 Angry Men, and of course, 12 O'Clock High. if you can get hold of over time, beyond this course, but if you can get hold of over time these movies, learn what we're about in terms of leadership theories and application, and then start to visualize what's happening in these movies and identify the leadership styles being used, you'll get a pretty good handle on leadership and what the common themes are, the common denominators are, the common, arguably, traits and characteristics, and so forth. And again, I'm not going to go through every slide here, but basically Apollo 13, well, what we deal with there is the ability to think creatively, keep your head in a crisis, manage communication. And as for failure, well, as it's pointed out in the movie, that's just not an option. The bridge on the River Kwai, when execution takes priority over strategy, the results can't help being catastrophic. And again, strategy becomes a big portion of leadership, and we'll be talking about that. Glengarry Glen Ross. Well, listen to these managers' words. Carefully observe their actions, then say and do exactly the opposite. And if you watch the movie, you'll see. And I'm not going to, again, It's a Wonderful Life, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 12 O'Clock High, which you're tasked to deal with. New leaders must first earn employees' respect, even if that means being unpopular. If they do it right, arguably, love will follow. And again, some of the resources we'll be playing with and so forth include, well, Epictetus, which is a James Stockdale thing, leadership, which comes to us from Nordhaus and the various leadership theories he presents in his book. And then It's Our Ship by Michael Abershoff, which is required reading and deals with basically the grassroots leadership aspect of this course. Lessons that we hope to garner from these movies, the ability to develop vision, conflict management and collaboration, decision making and problem solving, consensus building, and importantly, team building, creativity and innovation, effective communication, and this mentor slant protege relationship, put differently, leader follower relationship. And then we discuss a little bit about vision development, each of those, elements and so forth. Uh, you're familiar and you've seen this in other courses, but the learning cycle, if we look at this matrix, you have something called conscious incompetence. You have something called conscious competence, unconscious competence, and then unconscious incompetence. Well, obviously, we're seeking two of the four in particular. And I'll leave it for a discussion board argument as to whether we think conscious competence or unconscious competence is a better element to inject in a leadership situation. And we'll talk about some of that. And of course, creativity, effective communication, so on and so forth. So that's what we're doing with this first PowerPoint. Let me just spend a couple of minutes with this next one because we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about servant leadership. And so I want to just introduce the notion of some of the principles of servant leadership. And, when we start, again, we're always sourcing. So at the end of the day, yours truly, who is this guy? Well, among other things, and among, pretty large wall full of credentials and so forth, one of the accolades that I would hold on to is, I'm also, in addition to being a professor, I'm also an author. I've published, I've written about 6 books, published 3. First one was this Capitalism and Christianity, a Moral and Ethical Struggle. And we deal with some of the same elements there as, we have in leadership. The origin of servant leadership study, well, it's a combination of Greenleaf did a lot of research into this, and We'll talk a little bit about that. Human study, the evolution of management theorists, and the ethicists who work and deal with leadership and leadership issues. Now, again, you can Google most of this stuff. You don't need the textbook, but Robert Greenleaf established himself as, in quotes, an expert in the area of servant leadership. And once you start to read about that, and again, I'm not going to just spoon out a lot of this. I do want you to do a little bit of research. But servant leadership, I mean, if you think about that, we can all identify leaders that are more interested in self, and we can all identify leaders that are interested in bringing everybody else up. A leader, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but a leader is someone that doesn't, like, for example, maybe, the management traits of, planning, organizing, leading, controlling, and all of. Well, leadership, and several of you have brought this out in the discussion board and brought it out well, has to do with inspiration, has to do with, the idea of creating an environment for others to succeed. Because I've always argued that, if you do well, if you succeed, if you, whatever, how is that bad for me? And the answer is, it's not. The only time it's bad is if a leader is arguably insecure, and then I'm not sure that that person is a leader. Maybe the boss, maybe a manager, but I'm not sure they're a leader. Anyway, Greenleaf goes into a lot of these different details. So if you search Greenleaf, you'll get a perspective on that. 10 characteristics, especially that he works with: listening, empathy, healing, awareness, so on and so forth. So these are important elements. The idea of stewardship is not missed on us. Listening. So the servant leader reinforces this skill or these skills by a deep commitment to listen intently to others, not just sitting here saying, yeah, right, okay, yeah. And it's, listening, active listening, seeks to listen receptively to what is being said and what is being not said. Empathy. People need to be accepted and recognized for their special and unique spirit. We're not all the same. We don't think the same. We don't believe the same. And that's, I'm not certain, a bad thing or a good thing, depending on, how you bifurcate these issues. But I've always chosen to kind of take the perspective that everybody has something to offer. Sometimes hard to find that, and we may do it differently. But everybody has something. Everybody brings something to the table. Healing. Servant leaders recognize that they have an opportunity to help make whole those with whom they come into contact. Well, what does that mean? In other words, building a person, but without overtly saying, I'm going to build you into something, not that kind of thing. But how is it I can make things better for you? What is it you need? And this, and it's not a psychology course. However, we inject a little bit of psychology. Remember Maslow? Remember hearing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, there's an argument about among academics about whether that final, phase, so to speak, self-actualization, is actually something that is achievable or just aspirational. But let's go to the low-level Maslow stuff. It's pretty hard to make someone, in quotes, whole, to make their life better, to make them a better person, more complete, more evolved, more aware, more educated, more learned, more experienced, all these things, when they don't have a place to eat, don't have a place to sleep, don't have, follow what I'm saying, so now we're talking about survival stuff, which is very low level Maslow stuff. Maslow 6, self-actualization, which is a lot of what this speaks to. Well, that's a long road to hoe when you don't have food, you don't have shelter, et cetera, et cetera. So This idea of servant leadership becomes hugely important because it also entertains the notion, I believe, that what is it we do for our fellow man, our colleagues, etc. You know, how do we make them whole? How do we become servant leaders for others when in one breath, we're sitting back and taking the position, you don't belong here. You can't live here. Sorry, find your own food. Nope, don't have any work here. Artificial elements that are injected that create barriers to, a whole lot. And we'll speak of that. Awareness helps one understand the issues involving ethics, power, and values. And those words come easily. They seem a little bit abstract. So we're going to try and refine those a little bit. Persuasion, well, servant leader seeks to convince others rather than coerce compliance. So convince, and not meant as like, with a cudgel in our hand, do it my way. Well, that's the coerced compliance thing. Do it because I said to do it, because I'm the boss, because I have, more than just notional authority and so forth. And so you will do as I direct. Wouldn't we enjoy the notion of someone taking more of a position of enjoining us to be part of a good thing, a team, growing the team, growing the university for the benefit of our family, which is our student body, versus, get the point. Conceptualization, dream great dreams and think beyond the day-to-day realities. Now, there are some techniques and things like that, and that's not for tonight's conversation. Foresight, lessons from the past, the realities of the present, and consequences of the decisions we make for the future. Stewardship, holding something in trust for another. That's a biggie. That's a real big one, especially as it pertains to leadership. Commitment to the growth of people, because there are things that are extrinsically valuable and things that are intrinsically valuable. Extrinsic values include things like, compensation, more money, an extra day off, a bigger vacation, something like this. Intrinsically valuable things are things like human relationships, this sense of belonging, this sense of camaraderie. And we'll talk more about that as well. Building community. True community can be created, maybe not easily and not without a lot of cynical input, but community can be created. Where did servant leadership really get started? Well, again, we can talk an awful lot about that, but some argue that in the time of Aristotle and Socrates and Epictetus, that's where we really started to get a perspective on some of this stuff. And again, leadership philosophy will play into this. Other examples of servant leadership: I serve because I'm the leader. I am the leader because I serve. Servant first. Servant leaders see themselves as a servant first. The stewardship of the people they lead is a critical characteristic of a servant leader. And, again, whatever your belief structures beyond that. Servant leadership really works, and we'll give several examples of that. And, again, there's a model for servant leadership, and so on and so forth. You can look at it in terms of higher ed, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we're going to, and I'm going to stop share here, we're going to try and explore a lot of this stuff. And much of this was brought up by Pastor Joe Carter from Newark. I refer to him periodically. And we will be talking about something called CIIL. CIIL. Charisma, integrity, intelligence, and something called the lid. And I'm borrowing this from Pastor Carter, obviously a great leader in his community and for his constituency, well learned, well spoken, well authored, smart guy. And so we got CIIL from Pastor Carter and speaking to that as well. Okay, just about done. So I just want to go back to the syllabus. Don't forget to catch up topically, so aside from the dates, and again, there are no hard, fast due dates. Don't get too far behind. But the center column, course topics, well, definitions and myths, management versus leadership, the leader-follower relationship, and that's a little bit of Paul Hersey there. Identification of trait theory, and there are some PowerPoints to do with that. Theory X, Y, theory X, theory Y, that's McGregor. And then as we move forward, ethical leadership and decision making. And so we'll add to some of that. We'll put some meat on the bones, but watch 12 o'clock high and start to put some kind of an evaluation or analysis of that together. Okay, I just wanted to record this. Didn't seem like anybody joined us for our voluntary Zoom this evening. So just be well, stay safe, blessings to all. Email me if you're in some kind of a rut, you need a private Zoom to discuss something, or if there are any issues. And with that, good evening, have dinner, and we'll be chatting soon.